Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be sharing 2 different ways to use your dies with Simon Hurley Create Stamping Foam and also a couple extra bonus cards. So let's get into it. Throughout this video I'm going to use some new products from scrapbook.com. These are their Sprigs dies. They've got a bunch of different details in them and I thought they would be really cool to use with my stamping foam. When it comes to using the stamping foam, I like to tape it to an acrylic block for a little bit more pressure. So I'm going to go in with a little bit of mint tape. Any low tack repositionable adhesive would work well here. I just go in and roll this up like so, and then I'll place it down onto my acrylic block. Line it over top of my stamping foam and press it down. And this is going to give a lot more of an even pressure. Since it's that solid surface you can press down onto, it's going to get even pressure and even image all the way across. For the first technique, I'm going to take some of my dies with the cutting edge up like this. And yes, you can place the cutting edge up when you're using your dies. It's not going to cut the stamping foam. And I'm just going to kind of lay these out into a pattern that I like. Once I got the pattern that I like all prepared, I'm going to go in with my heat tool. Here I'm going to use my Ranger Heat It tool, but you can use any heat tool. You just want to heat it up for 10 to 15 seconds and make sure you keep the heat moving all the way across your stamping foam. Once you've got it all heated, without taking too much time, go in and press this into your dies. And then when we lift it off, there we get a really awesome background. And I like the really fine line that this gives. I'm going to show you another way to use the dies, but let's ink this up first. Alright, so I'm just going to bring in some reds and oranges from my line. And I like to take my color and just kind of swipe that ink pad onto the surface. That swiping motion is going to apply the ink really nice and evenly over top of the surface. I find if you tap like you normally would on a stamp, it's going to give you those lines and it's not going to look great. So to get the best colored inking, I just go in and swipe across the surface like that. Next I'll go in with a little bit of Guppy and we can really blend the colors together here on the surface. There we go. And then last but not least, we'll go in with a little bit of Shooting Star, which is my super bright yellow color. If you get a little bit of darker ink on your pad, don't worry, I'm just gonna go in with a dry paper towel and just wipe it and it'll come nice and clean to the original color. So don't worry too much about contaminating the other colors. And then when I want to blend a color that's kind of a little bit different, so you can see that line in between the orange and red, I'll just go in with a blending brush or a blending tool and really quickly blend in between those colors to help that blend and smooth it out. To help transfer the color, I'm going to spray it with a little bit of water, and you want to do a really fine mist. So I'm going to hold it from about this far away. I've got this really fine continuous mister, which I'll link down below. And you can just mist right over top, and you just want a tiny little bit of water. You're going to barely be able to see it, but that's going to give me a really great blend of my color without losing any of the detail. So then I can bring it on my surface here, press that down to stamp it onto the cardstock, and lift it off the surface. And there we have that really beautiful color on there. I love how these colors kind of blended together like that. And you can also see that really fine line you get from the cutting edge of the die. I love how that looks with all of the little details, and being able to turn them into a stamp is really cool. Alright, to clean it off, I'm just going to go in with a little bit of water, and I'll just go in and wipe this off of the surface. My inks clean off really well without really staining, so you don't have to worry about that too much. To get a new impression, I'm going to use this same foam, and I'm just going to start heating it up again with my heat tool. Now this is going to kind of remold the foam and flatten it back out. You can see how quickly it happens there, and it's just going to turn it right back into our original stamping foam so that we can keep reusing this over and over, which is awesome. Of course, the next way to use dies is do die cuts. So here I've die cut them out of my stark white cardstock. You want to use a pretty thick cardstock, and this is going to create a beautiful stamp impression with your stamping foam as well. So I'm going to do the exact same thing where I take these different pieces and create a background with them. Once I got everything in place, I can then heat set it again for 10 to 15 seconds to remold our foam so we can get our shape. Alright, and without wasting any time, I'll press this right into our die cuts. And when we lift that out, you can see that that gives a really beautiful impression as well. It's totally different from the last one because this time you're pressing in that paper that's already been cut. Instead of having all those fine line details, you have whatever was raised with this cardstock. Alright, so for this one, I've grabbed a couple of different greens and I'm going to do the exact same type of inking where I just go in stripes of color here. Again, using kind of edge of the ink pad to get a smaller stripe of color, and doing that same technique where we swipe the ink on for the best results. And then we can stamp down our image. And when we lift that off, you have our beautiful impression. I love how this one turned out. Again, it's got a totally different look than our first one. With our first one, we've got that cutting edge, and that gives all those tiny little details, whereas here, it gives the actual die cut that's been cut out. So two completely different ways to use your dies with the stamping foam and get some beautiful stamped impressions. To cut this down, I'm going into my guillotine trimmer here, and no matter how we stamped it, I like to take the guide edge of the guillotine trimmer, like this, and line up the stamping right with the edge of the guillotine. This is going to give you a nice even border, and then I can line it up with that same marking on all the sides to get that same even border all the way around. For this sentiment, I want to use these black outline Christmas die. I love this Merry word. I think it's really fun. So I'm going to create my own colored and shimmery cardstock. So to do this, I'm going to go in with a piece of my stark white cardstock, and I'm bringing in a little bit of my Lunar paste. Now I've shown a couple different ways to apply Lunar paste, but here I'm just going to take my palette knife and my blending foam. You could also use a blending brush to do this, and I'll just apply a little bit onto the foam. Then we'll go right onto my stark white cardstock and just swipe this onto the surface there. And this is going to create a really beautiful, shiny cardstock for us to use. While we're waiting for this to dry, let's clean off my tools. So I just go in and clean off my palette knife quickly, but then with the blending foam, you want to make sure you clean this out so it doesn't get all crusty. So to do that, I'm just going to take quite a bit of water, saturate my foam. You can also remove the foam and clean it out in the sink, but this works too. And then I'm just going to dab it onto my paper towel until the foam is completely back to being clean, clear, and white, and then you won't have it be crusty for the next use. All right, once it's clean and clear like this, you should be good to go. This is one thing I love about the Lunar paste. When you apply it so thin like this, it really is super quick to dry. It's not gonna come off on your hands once it's all dry like this, but it's got a ton of shine, which I think is amazing. I'm gonna quickly run this through my die cutting machine with the Merry die. Thought I'd bring in a little awkward die cutting for this. All right, this came out perfectly, and you can actually use either the frame or the letters, which is really awesome. So I don't know which one I'm gonna use on today's card. All right, I also wanna add the word Christmas, so I pulled out the handwritten Christmas stamp set from Simon Hurley Create, and I'm gonna do a little bit of creative masking. So what I'm gonna do is grab a little bit of my mint tape here. We'll peel off some pieces, and I'm just going to mask right around that word so we can get rid of that banner and just ink up the little sentiment. All right, once that's all masked up there, we're just going to ink it up really quickly. Make sure to get into there so you can get the full sentiment. And we'll lift off all of our tape that we used for masking, and then we can stamp down our sentiment. All right, that turned out perfectly. Now we just have the word Christmas, and that is going to work great with our Merry. All right, so I'm actually going to use this outside area to line up my sentiment. So we'll just adhere it down temporarily. Then we'll take our letters with our little bit of permanent liquid adhesive and use this guide to line up each letter. So I actually like that they include this guide because it makes it really easy to adhere everything down and make sure it's going to be straight and even on the card. If they didn't include this, I know I, for one, would be completely lost on how to adhere these guys down. Once each letter's down, we can then slowly start peeling this up, making sure all the letters are still in place, and then everything is lined up perfectly, and I love that beautiful shine we have from our DIY cardstock. All right, I've added this onto a card base, and here is that finished card. I really love how it turned out with that beautiful sentiment with the Lunar paste, and how this background turned out with the die cuts. I love that you can get two totally different effects from the same die cuts, just whether you use the actual dies or you use the dies that you've cut out already to use with your stamping foam. Now, as a fun bonus card, I also wanted to use this Winter Cottage layering stencil from scrapbook.com. I thought these little houses were so fun for Christmas. All right, so you have the houses and some leaves on one layer, and you also have kind of the lights of the houses on the other layer, which I thought would be fun to do with the paste. So I'm going to do this layer first. All right, so I'm going to lay down this stencil with the windows onto my Make Art station here. I like to use the back of the Make Art station sometimes when I use pastes and stuff because it's a little bit easier to clean off without ruining the lines or anything. So I'm going to place my magnets down so that it stays in place. Alright, so I'm just going to use my palette knife and apply kind of a little bit of a thicker layer of my lunar paste right through the stencil. I've shown a couple different ways to apply it, but this is kind of the easiest way and most known way to apply the paste down. It's going to give me a nice thick layer, which is going to give me tons of shine with this paste. We're going to scrape it off to give a nice even layer all over our stencil. We'll lift that off, and we've got our beautiful windows, which we can set off to the side quickly to dry. And then to clean off our stencil, I'm going to do the same thing. You want to just hit it with some water pretty quickly so that it doesn't dry. You can always take this underneath the sink and clean it off, but just clean it before that lunar paste dries on that stencil. Alright, once that first layer is dry, I'm going to take my second layer with these houses on it. Now there are kind of these pieces of greenery throughout, and I want to make sure that those are going to stay green. So I'm just going to use my little bits of mint tape here. It's not too difficult to do, to just go in, rip off a couple little pieces, and make sure that these are masked off before we start. Now for these houses, I'm just going to go in with a little bit of Wolf, which is my gray color from Simon Hurley Create, and my blending brush, and I'm just going to quickly go over all of these houses with a little bit of that gray color. So it's as simple as just going over top of all these guys and blending them in. And the reason why I did this in a paste instead of like a yellow ink is number one, it's gonna give us a bunch of shine with that lunar paste, which I think is gonna be stunning. But also, it's going to resist with the windows. So if you just did that with an ink, it would kind of be covered up by this gray ink next, and it would kind of dull the color down. Alright, then I'm adding a second layer here of ink. So just taking that Wolf again, same blending brush, same color, but I'm just going in a little bit more heavy-handed and with more ink. And since you can kind of build these inks on top of each other, we can really get a nice shading from the bottom upwards with that darker gray color. Alright, now for these littler leaves, I'm going to go in with a little bit of Tropical Tango on one of my mini blender brushes. You could use a blending tool or a blender brush, anything to get into these little tiny details. And then we can just go in and pounce our color right onto the surface. And you could do the same thing where you go in with a little bit more color on one end to add a little bit of that natural shading. But I love these small little brushes because they're really easily able to get into all of those tiny little details without hitting the houses that we've already done. And then for these different types of leaves, I'm going to switch it up and do a little bit of a different color green. So here I'm going to go in with Viper. I like to switch up the different tones and shades of color to get a little bit of variation if there's several of one image on a stencil or on a stamp. I absolutely love how this turned out with that different masking that we did and that lunar paste for those windows. This layering stencil is so much fun. Now to add a little bit interest, I'm going to go in with the Tim Holtz decal trimmer, and I'm just going to trim it down just a little bit. I'm going to bring it to this bottom edge so we can get our beautiful decal. And you guys can see that gives just a nice finishing touch on the edge. I love this decal trimmer for just a little bit of something extra. Alright, to add a little bit more interest to the deckled edge and also kind of tie your eye to the center, I want to darken up the edge just a little bit. So here I'm using just a touch of the Breakup blue color, and I'm just going to bring it in slightly on all four of the edges. I do this quite a bit on my cards, and I love just the little bit of interest and depth that it adds to the card. Now for this sentiment, I'm going to use a Posh Poinsettias sentiment. I like the Happy Holidays from Our Home to Yours, since it's got all different houses on here. So I'm going to actually stamp this in red. I'm going to use a little bit of my newest color, Love Struck, and then I'm also going to roll on just a tiny bit of Game Over for a little bit of shading on the sentiment. And I love that little bit of rolled sentiment for a little bit of shading and that touch of red this gives. Alright, I've added that sentiment down and there is the finished card. I think this layering stencil is so cool and I love how that lunar paste just shines through those windows. It finished it off really nicely with that sentiment related to the home. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about stamping foam and using it with your dies. It is a ton of fun and I can't wait to see what you guys create. Leave a comment down below which card was your favorite and give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoyed and want to see more like this one. Alright guys, I hope you have a wonderful day and I'll see you all soon. Bye!